Hey, you guys, this is the Task Force 70 podcast. Thanks for coming back. I'm Chappie, but you guys already know that. Like and subscribe. I won't insult your intelligence by describing how and why that's important, especially for a nonprofit, but we appreciate you guys. Today, we're having a long conversation with Doc Spears. Doc Spears is John Spears, and everybody really seems to enjoy doing full disclosure. But if you don't know us and you don't know me or you don't know Doc, you probably don't know, which may be contextually important. Doc and I have been partners for a long time, probably approaching 15 or 20 years, something like that. Teaching together. He's one of my big brothers. He and I came up together on the training side under Pat, and then us and later on Chris Sizlove kind of joined in and ran our own training thing. And now with the realization of the desperate need for Task Force 70 Foundation, John has gratefully agreed to help us out. He's a member of the board of advisors, and most of that is to keep me sane and on track. Is most of his job. So John has been in the military special operations world for a long time, since I was in short pants, as they say, and got out of the military, but continues to maintain contacts and purpose in that world, in addition to his private practice world. And he still travels around with us for decades now, training cops from all size jurisdictions around the United States and around the world. And he is an expert in a lot of things, precision marksmanship, CQB. But the real gift that John has is identifying the important parts of military application of procedures, translating that into a function that is very applicable in a law enforcement context, given the constitutionality and the laws involved. John is one of the experts in the world at how to not just train with a military guy, but how to express that, organize a curriculum, and express it in a way that not only cops will understand, but that cops can apply correctly within the Constitution and within their missions. So, without any further ado, let's bring John in. Hey, Doc, how are you?
Hey, my brother, great to be with you.
It's great to have you, man. I know that most of the internet already knows, but in case we have some folks who don't, can you just give us the elevator speech bio for yourself, just so people know who's talking,
Yeah,
that kind of thing?
John Spears, people called me Doc forever, and I just
Mm-hmm.
learned to live with it, and it's totally cool. Um, my life started in U.S. Army
Mm-hmm.
and U.S. Army Special Forces. I was an operator in the 7th Special Forces Group through the
Mm-hmm.
1980s, and the things that were going on in the world back then, and the
Mm-hmm.
things that I did was contributing to our uh, counter narco terrorism mission in Central and South America. And then I was
Mm-hmm.
very privileged to be one of the Special Forces advisors during the Civil War in El Salvador over a period of
Mm-hmm.
several years, working in unconventional warfare and counterinsurgency. Um, and then I had a little break where I
Mm-hmm.
advanced my education. I became a doctor, eventually ended up as an orthopedic spine surgeon, and
Mm-hmm.
made a promise to my family not to go overseas and
Mm-hmm.
get back in during the GWAT, and instead uh, tried to contribute by being a trainer and a consultant. And that's near the time when you and I started hanging out
Mm-hmm.
with Pat Rogers. I think
Mm-hmm.
you've been running LMS defense for not too long. You'd just been
Mm-hmm.
back from Iraq for maybe a year or so, like that.
Mm-hmm.
When I was instructor for Pat Rogers, and We attended LMS courses, and you attended our courses, and then
Mm-hmm.
before we knew it, we were all one big happy family under EAT, and then formed Forge Tactical. So yeah, I've been a very privileged, lucky, fortunate guy. The law enforcement world, thanks to you and Pat, welcomed me, though I'm not a cop, welcomed me into their world to be trusted to train officers in weapons and tactics and procedures and advise and consult. And then, yeah, I'm really fortunate that I still get to participate with the Army. I'm still an active contractor
Mm-hmm.
at Fort Benning, training snipers, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm just an all around lucky guy, and I'm having a lot of fun, and I am truly so excited and honored to be a part of Task Force 70, because I really, really believe that it's an entity that is needed to exist for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've talked about it before, but some of the genesis of that kind of starts with how we did things at Forge Tactical, to basically act as a charitable organization,
Right.
turn nobody away from training, who needed training, who was a good guy. And but
It's
now
far more expensive for a for-profit company to be a charity than for a charity to be a charity. Ask
yes,
us
it
how we
certainly
know.
was, but anybody who gets in the training business
Mm-hmm.
with the goal of making money is in the training business for the wrong reason.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely the truth, and they're
You
not
know,
going to succeed coming at it that way. That's for damn sure.
well,
So,
you can certainly, it's like I have a sideline as a science fiction author, and I've
mm-hmm.
published about a good 10 or 11 books, things like that, in military science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a very nice fan base, and they're great people. But I get that
Mm-hmm.
it's like, why don't you run like a special, weekend experience? Everybody ought to do like CQB and stuff like that. I said, like, yeah, it's
No.
you could charge people huge money, and they'd come and do all of that, learn how to shoot real guns and stuff like that. And it's like, I have never needed money that badly. I'm
Mm-hmm.
very glad to say.
I would much rather shove bamboo shoots into orifices of my body.
Yeah, it's like, I love everybody, but it's like,
Yeah,
that's not what I want to
exactly.
do, nor we've turned down many opportunities over the
Mm-hmm.
years for major industry
Mm-hmm.
support, because it required us to essentially be shills,
Right.
which I'm not casting aspersions at the friends of ours
Mm-hmm.
who have been major representatives
Mm-hmm.
in the defense industry for products, because there are people who make absolutely wonderful products,
Right.
and then there are those who don't, but you're
Mm-hmm.
required to toe the line and promote their
Right.
products because they're sending you checks, and we've never
Right.
been in the position where we needed to do that to feed our
Right.
families. And I've always been very glad that I've never had to do that.
Well, I'm very grateful that with our businesses that we have on the profit side that we have avoided the necessity to do that, like you said, to feed our families. So, like no aspersions casted, but that's a excuse me, that's a difficult position to be in, especially when things go south.
Yes, because they very frequently do in our
Mm-hmm.
industry, which for
Yes.
people, like us who've been around for so many decades,
Mm-hmm.
we've seen it happen time and time again, which is always, which
Yep.
is what's always that experience has painted us to say, like, we
Mm-hmm.
can't hitch our names and our reputations
Mm-hmm.
to somebody for a price. It's just,
Yep.
you can't do it.
Exactly. Exactly. So, John, you were on a phenomenal long form podcast with a long explanation of your military career and some of those operations that I found very interesting. Can you call that one out for me real quick? I didn't write it down to tell people where to go to check that one out because that one's super
Um,
interesting.
that it's now even I have to look because my poor brain, but
Mm-hmm.
Bud Gibson
Mm-hmm.
is a special operations historian
Mm-hmm.
who made it a big part of his research to
Mm-hmm.
investigate, record the oral history while we still
Mm-hmm.
have these great guys
Right.
of the Special Forces SOG operators from
Mm-hmm.
Vietnam, and he took a very large personal interest in that and has become
Mm-hmm.
quite an expert. And he has a podcast. Um, I'll have to look it up. My mind's
Well,
blank, but if you look
we'll
him up
look it
on
up and we'll put it up on the screen.
X or on Facebook, Bud
Mm-hmm.
Gibson, and it will
Mm-hmm.
come right up. But
Yeah.
he had me on for a couple of long segments talking
Mm-hmm.
about my period of time and
Mm-hmm.
specifically focusing on El Salvador, uh,
Mm-hmm.
which was interesting and historically noteworthy for several
Mm-hmm.
reasons, not the least of which is it's one of the very few examples of a counterinsurgency operation that was successful.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it was also noteworthy because it was carried out by literally a handful of special forces operators, uh,
Mm-hmm.
over a period of less than 10 years. And this was because of the political climate of the
Mm-hmm.
post Vietnam era in our country. Uh, and it was essentially a secret war that the
Mm-hmm.
U.S. Fought that was denied officially,
Mm-hmm.
even when we experienced casualties and fatalities. And only many, many years later, in the late 90s, was combat service of special forces in El
Mm-hmm.
Salvador recognized by the Department of Defense
Mm-hmm.
and also likewise other operations that we ran in Colombia, Bolivia, and
Mm-hmm.
Peru, fighting narco terrorism during that period of time in the 80s. So I was very privileged to be a part of that history, and
Mm-hmm.
it was really a great opportunity when Bud Gibson did a couple of long form interviews with me where I could really lay
Mm-hmm.
that whole history out because it's still largely unknown. It
Mm-hmm.
should be studied um, and understood in the context of unconventional warfare and
Mm-hmm.
counterinsurgency, and especially because the worldwide Marxist movement by any name has
Mm-hmm.
never gone away. It's in resurgence again,
Mm-hmm.
especially within our own borders. We're living the 1970s again in many
Mm-hmm.
ways.
We
Uh,
are.
Perhaps we're coming out of it, but it's only through education and awareness that
Mm-hmm.
we're able to do so. So anyway, very
Mm-hmm.
grateful to Bud Gibson for the opportunity to share that history. And I on that second segment, I told just a lot of my eyewitness stories and experiences,
Mm-hmm.
especially from El Salvador, that were meant to be pretty humorous. And I'm sure I
Mm-hmm.
talked about a lot of things that have never seen light of day, that
Mm-hmm.
never come out, and
Right.
I still half expect there to be backlash from that. But
Probably.
you know, you know,
Probably.
dox me, find my address.
Right.
Uh,
Come on.
yeah,
Yeah.
don't come and ambush me, but come and have a beer, and I'll tell you other
Mm-hmm.
stories.
Exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, when I was in grad school, I attempted to, this was the early 2000s, I attempted to research that conflict for what I was doing in my graduate work, and I couldn't in the 2000s. And I was told, and it was a great piece of information. The more successful any special operation is, the less the public should know about it. And that's why that conflict interests me so much, is because it was so successful. And when it can be made more public, especially in level of detail, it can start to be used by all kinds of organizations, including law enforcement organizations, to gather some really good lessons learned that are on a positive side, for lack of a better phrase, to like, this was done and it worked. Those types of pieces of it.
Um, It's very important to understand, like I say, looking especially at like the case of El Salvador, but there are other
Mm-hmm.
countries that were experiencing the same, internal destabilization by
Mm-hmm.
outside and inside forces. That make no mistake about it, that it was all directed from Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
It was all part of the worldwide Marxist revolutionary
Mm-hmm.
plan. Um,
Yep.
and they're the same things that we see going on domestically. It's
Mm-hmm.
like I say, the 1970s, the early 1980s, in an overseas
Mm-hmm.
context, we're seeing the same things over and over and over again. Uh, and for anyone in law enforcement have a basic understanding
Mm-hmm.
of urban guerrilla warfare,
Mm-hmm.
insurgencies, counterinsurgencies, those destabilization operations,
Mm-hmm.
and what the role of law enforcement, the
Mm-hmm.
community as a whole working together, and then bringing in higher levels of help. And
Mm-hmm.
domestically, we don't, because we have this separation in our country. The
Mm-hmm.
military is never going to be involved in anything domestically, so that becomes
Mm-hmm.
very, very much the purview of law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
um, Interestingly enough, things we've talked about before is special forces. For people who don't know, the Green Berets,
Mm-hmm.
U.S. Army Special Forces, their mission is unconventional warfare and counter guerrilla warfare, counterinsurgency, is an inherent part of all of that. And the mission of special forces is essentially uh, working by, with, through, as we
Mm-hmm.
say, uh, host governments with their military and police forces to help
Mm-hmm.
do for themselves in their own countries what they need to do to reestablish security and social justice and just forms of government, so that the United States is not committing blood and
Mm-hmm.
treasure to reestablish those things in that country.
Right.
So, while the, except, we just finished more or less this, 2 decade long global war on terror. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but, in all, during that and in all other intervening periods where, as far as America is concerned, we're not in active warfare. There's hardly a country in the world where special forces is not working as foot soldiers
Mm-hmm.
of foreign policy, on behalf of the American people, to do exactly those things by, with, and
Mm-hmm.
through trying to restore justice and
Mm-hmm.
security and peace in countries that otherwise would not be moving towards those goals. So special forces, besides working with a host nations, special forces and military end up spending a lot of time with local law enforcement agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And though through the training pipeline, you don't necessarily get a good basis of formal training in domestic law enforcement, the legal basis behind it
Mm-hmm.
in the United States or elsewhere. But by the inherent nature, you end up working with foreign government law enforcement quite a bit. You learn a lot about their requirements, and
Mm-hmm.
most often, what you're doing is you're training them how to uh, act as security forces, or
Mm-hmm.
like in the case of, oh well, El Salvador, most the South American nations that were experiencing narco terrorism. In many times, you're teaching them the skills that are like accelerated light infantry skills,
Mm-hmm.
CQB type skills, because you're teaching them how to do more aggressive military type operations that
Mm-hmm.
fall under the domain of law enforcement. Where it's like, in domestic law enforcement, we're used to having those tactical capabilities with SRTs and SWAT teams, who can deal with crisis response, and who can deal with like the 4 basic missions of SWAT, things like that. Most foreign police forces don't have those kind of capabilities that are inherent with those organizations. So yeah,
Right.
very interesting. Special Forces ends up doing quite a bit of that, and training law enforcement in that regard. And then, like I say, for a guy like me, and I'm certainly not unique or alone in that. Law enforcement has embraced the kind of skills that we can help impart to improve officer survivability and improve capabilities for the tactical units within law enforcement special operations. So there's certainly a lot of opportunity for crossover. And for a guy like me, 20 odd years of being privileged to work with law enforcement, I have learned a lot from like guys like you and Pat Rogers, who mentored me through all of that for so many years, and then through all the great agencies and individual deputies and officers that I've been able to work with, in patrol and in tactical level investigative units and sniper sections and things like that. And so just feel really privileged to have been accepted into the community and be able to contribute. And
Right.
many, many, many times, it's like I say, has been the guy who's been there to instruct and ended up walking away with more knowledge than what I imparted.
Right. Absolutely. One of the traveling around like we do, or dealing with so many cops from so many agencies around the country, and keeping one eye kind of on the internet, which is, 90% a cesspool, but there's a 10% of good information getting out that way. Um, One of the challenges I've seen are a few military trainers who come from the military who haven't done the time or effort to research what the law enforcement mission is, don't understand what they don't understand. So that's why I have a special respect for longtime special forces operators, not because they can do a SIF mission in Iraq. That's a mission, that's a very high level direct action mission. It's all of the experience that the special forces community has in training people in a way that actually leads into teaching as opposed to just instructing. So one of the things I wanted to get into is, or we've kind of already talked about it, the benefit, especially to small departments who don't have a lot of or any resources to do this kind of thing. The Some of those agencies are better served with a longtime special forces guy, um, who understands that they don't know some of the legal contextual background, but identifying how to teach someone. Special Forces seems to have really cracked the code a long time ago on how to actually teach individual guys, as opposed to, checking the box kind of deal. So I'm I'm curious, and I think I know the answer to this. Um, would you, without, again, we're not here to call people out. There's very little bad training. There's some, but there's very little. Most of it's okay. Um, would you recommend a small department who, whether by default or by assignment, somebody's in charge of making sure that their 6 patrol guys are as capable as possible? And we're going to get to the applicability of counterinsurgency operations in small law enforcement departments in the United States, given where we are right now. Um, what are some of the benefits that a guy in that position could gain from seeking out either a company or an individual, an older or more experienced, more mature special forces guy whose experience goes beyond the GWAT, who has on the ground trained cops in other countries or cops in the United States. Um, I view it as a high degree of bang for buck with training with somebody like that, as opposed to the nearby large agency doesn't have experience teaching small departments, doesn't have the contextual applicability of teaching that a longtime special forces guy would have. Is that, in your opinion, um, is that a misplaced understanding, or is that a fair way to think about it?
Uh, I, I think it is fair. You know,
Mhm.
in the broader context, there's always this question. It's come up so many times. You know, it's like, how do I, even as an individual, you know,
Mhm.
responsible citizen, how do I know the person that I'm going to is who I should be seeing for training? Are they
Mhm.
reputable? Do they actually have the credentials, you know, that they say they do? You know, how do I know that I'm not seeing somebody
Mhm.
who's perfectly
Right.
crazy? And the same, you know, and especially then we talked about, you know, credentialed armed professionals and then agencies. You know, how do we know
Mhm.
who we're seeking training from? And seeking outside training is very, very important. Number one,
Mhm.
first of all, um, you know, one thing I always say to people across the board is provenance is not everything.
Mhm.
You know, somebody's provenance, meaning their history, their background, you know, what schools they've been to, you know, what
Mhm.
unit were they in,
Right.
what roles have they fulfilled, you know, yeah, provenance is pretty important. You know, it's like,
Mhm.
right, I don't, you know, consult a dude who's read a law book for
Mhm.
legal advice. I see a licensed attorney.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes provenance is all that you have to go off when you're trying to determine who to train with.
Mhm.
And provenance should absolutely say something about the individual, of course, right? By their
Mhm.
background, by what they've done, you know, things like that. The problem that we get into so often, I think, especially when we're trying to mate like people who come from a military special operations
Mhm.
background, how to disseminate necessary, appropriate knowledge to the law enforcement operator from patrol all the way through tactical officers
Mhm.
and things like that is no matter the provenance at the very most basic level, the information has to be correct,
Mhm.
right? Provenance alone does not determine that the information that they're transmitting is correct or applicable, or so there could be a huge confusion on that. And I know you're
Mhm.
right there with me because we've
Mhm.
spent nearly 2 decades together seeing those things and experiencing
Mhm.
that, and you know, dealing with dudes who like, man, I just came from, you know, they sent these guys from X unit who
Mhm.
are, you know, the number one guys in the world, and this is what they showed us, and they try and discuss it. Or it's like we're contrasting what we just learned with those guys, what you're putting out to us, and things like that. And it's like, well, number one, I understand that the provenance of the guys you just trained with would seem like that is the backstop, you know,
Mhm.
where it's like, you know, there can be no dissenting opinion that that is the right
Mhm.
thing because of the provenance of where the information
Mhm.
came from. And then it gets down to if you were actually understanding what they were
Mhm.
showed you how to do something, if you were
Right.
actually able to carry those procedures out at the
Mhm.
level that they can carry them out, and you applied them to the situation or the context which they apply them, I think that would be likely true.
Mhm.
I'm not entirely sure that you absorbed what they were trying to tell
Mhm.
you correctly, because I don't think
Mhm.
necessarily the information was transmitted correctly. I could be wrong
Mhm.
on that. What I can say is what I see you doing or what I see you telling me that you learned, I know in no way hell is true or correct.
Mhm.
I don't care the
Right.
provenance of where you learned it from.
Right.
And the context in which you're hoping to apply these things is just flat out wrong, and it's out of the experience of the people who like tried to give that to you. So I
Mm-hmm.
totally dig that that's what you were taught and that's where you're shown. Now let's talk about why, through a principled reason approach, why I don't, it's like I'm not trying to make you unlearn what you just learned from
Mm-hmm.
those super high speed guys. Focus on what I'm trying to show you, and if the end of 40 hours together, if you're not convinced, you just got to take what I gave you and take what you think was valuable
Mm-hmm.
and run with it, discard the rest. But I'm pretty sure if you actually make an effort to learn what I'm trying to teach you, that
Mm-hmm.
it will make more sense and it will be more applicable and more useful than
Yes.
taking this, whatever it is you learned, and
Mm-hmm.
there's like concrete example, there's so many incidents like that have happened,
Mm-hmm.
training an agent, a pretty large sized metro agency once,
Mm-hmm.
one of a million examples like all of this,
Mm-hmm.
where these guys were saying, man, we just got back from X unit in X
Mm-hmm.
place, and they showed us how every room is you just run the walls,
Mm-hmm.
and it's exactly your guy on
Mm-hmm.
the left wall is trying to deal with any threat,
Mm-hmm.
a few meters ahead of the guy running the right wall, and you just went through the room and you gunned everything down. And it's like I'd say, well, got to realize that the particular unit that you came from that does that, they get guys killed on the reg.
Mm-hmm.
And it's perfectly acceptable in that unit. It's
Mm-hmm.
almost desirable because it adds
Right.
to that air of mystique for
Mm-hmm.
that group of individuals. And that's why they're kind of not very well respected by the
Mm-hmm.
rest of our community. So let's take a step back and talk about why that's not a good way of
Mm-hmm.
doing anything. So never confuse provenance with valid information,
Mm-hmm.
because context is it where that information could be applied if it was learned correctly, if it was practiced, if it was performed correctly. All of those factors
Mm-hmm.
fall in there. So it's like I say, yep, provenance should play a big role in who you're seeking out training, but at the end of the day, the information still has to be correct.
Mm-hmm.
And
Especially.
and that is sometimes a gigantic disconnect for military operators, taking things to a law enforcement context. So,
Mm-hmm.
so I see that. Take that for what that's worth.
Right.
Um,
And you and I have seen that a lot.
oh yeah, we have.
So the challenge, obviously, the task force is designed specifically for the bottom 70% of law enforcement from these small agencies. One of the things that got us thinking down this road, and the identification of such a serious need for it, even if a team is small enough that they don't have a tactical unit, the patrol guys at some level, a lot of departments have recognized, especially recently, just because we're out in the middle of nowhere doesn't mean nothing's going to happen. Like we're actually at a higher risk as a percentage of population of having some of these types of just off the hook calls. So we need to prepare to deal with that. But this is our budget. So
Yep,
let's
yep.
do a bunch of research and let's pick what we're going to do. The thing that a lot of the trainers don't understand is that for the small departments, they're as opposed to large departments, the large departments that we train, um, their training has gotten so much better over the last 10 years because the instructors have become a younger cadre and they're going to a lot of different training. And as a culture, the large agency training teams have by and large turned into a vetting process for how they can best train their guys, and that's a phenomenal way to do it. The small agencies, the vast majority of them, they're going to get 40 hours of training, and that's got to last them the skills, techniques, and procedures that they learn, whether they think of it that way or not. That's what it actually is.
Yeah.
Whatever they learn has got to last them for the rest of their career. Can they replicate that? Can they continue to rep it out correctly?
Yeah,
Uh,
sustainability.
right. Can they teach it to somebody else? Because they do not have the budget. Like a lot of, we know some close friends who work at these large agencies who go on the department's dime. They go to a week-long course once a quarter somewhere, doing something, whatever their specialty is, right? And that's
And,
awesome. It
and
it continues to grow the
I can tell,
capability.
and as you well know, we have close relationships with
Hmm.
many of the largest
Hmm.
metro size
Hmm.
SWAT agencies in the country, who very frequently their outside training budget is $0.
Right.
It's zero. I mean, the biggest agencies
Right.
that there are,
Right.
with tactical units that have,
Hmm.
sometimes uh, 16, 20
Hmm.
full-time assigned officers,
Hmm.
and that many again for part-time
Hmm.
officers. They all have patrol duties, of course.
Right.
That's a big, like, misconception,
Hmm.
that there's
Right.
like 16 SWAT cops who are just hanging out in like the the the
Yeah.
SWAT house waiting to be
Hmm.
called out for some kind of SWAT
Hmm.
thing. Is like, yeah, well,
Yep.
that doesn't exist.
That's not a thing. Yeah.
That's not a thing that I've ever been around. But it's
Hmm.
like, right, there's some of these people's perception,
Hmm.
that's happening. Is like, right, they were the biggest metro agents you've ever heard, where it's like I say, we've done that for decades. It's like,
Hmm.
hey, we just got no money, but we got guys, and we need, you got this,
Hmm.
you know, mechanical thermal ballistic breaching course going on. Can we
Hmm.
slide, some guys in?
Yeah.
It's like, send me 4 guys. I mean,
Hmm.
you got to pay for your own room and board. I ain't paying to feed
Hmm.
you and house
Right.
you. But it's like, as far as coming to the course, come on, man, send
Hmm.
the guys up here. We'll take care of them. Hey, you got
Right.
a shoot house course. You got a, team team tactics course.
Hmm.
It's like, yeah, go ahead, send it. It's like,
Hmm.
there's, you got no money in the budget. We never turn anybody away.
Right.
But
Right.
it's like I say, it's truly, it's, the for Task Force 70, it's not the, you know, uh, our people in these agencies are not the, they're not the bottom 70%. They're the
Hmm.
most important 70%, because
Hmm.
they really have a lack of resources.
Right.
And what in the world is more potentially dangerous than a deputy or an officer who's in these tremendously large
Hmm.
rural areas, who are by themselves without
Hmm.
immediate backup? They're not
Hmm.
partnered. They're not. I mean, these are people who need the maximum
Hmm.
number of variable skills,
Hmm.
to provide for the safety of the public at large
Hmm.
and themselves.
Right.
They become the most important
Hmm.
of
Yeah.
all of our law
Absolutely.
enforcement officers, because
Hmm.
they're so underserved. Um,
Yep. Well, and they, of all the federal funnel of cash that goes into law enforcement, they they tend to focus on the large agencies or the federal entities. Well, we'll come save you in your small population, large area jurisdiction. What are we doing for the arrive on scene to 3.5 hours later, when that all of that support is going to show up? Like, but what is happening in between? How are we actually saving Americans in that time in between? And that's the gap that the task force is aimed at, is making those guys maximally capable, because that's the
not
thing
to,
that's not being touched.
not to belabor it, but it's like I say, that it would, one of those groups that I include within
Hmm.
all of that, is, though they may be somewhat better resourced. It was something I learned, when I learned it, years and years ago, working
Hmm.
with any of our squirrel cops, as we
Oh
call
yeah.
them, any of our conservation agents,
Hmm.
whatever they are, state to state. Is like, those guys, by definition, are in the most remote
Hmm.
locations. The people that they are potentially dealing with
Hmm.
are almost always certainly armed.
Right.
And
Right.
and those poor guys are,
Hmm.
some of the most at-risk law enforcement officers in the country.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't get me wrong. It's like for people who are not familiar with these problem sets, and it's very easy to look at law enforcement as just this one big, homogeneous entity in our country. It's
Right.
absolutely not. And while it's like I say, I'm the most pro tactical officer supporter that I can possibly be, and there are people who from like I say, a couple of decades of association, I don't think of or treat tactical officers any differently than I do a guy who's on a special forces A team. I consider them by their ethos and the job they do and their dedication. I consider them to be the same brand of human being. Absolutely no less or different. But as far as like people exposed to danger, I mean the guy on the SWAT team who's gone on 100 hits. Depending upon the nature of those things, they may not be more dangerous than the patrol officer who's done 100 traffic stops.
Right.
100 of this, 100 reps of this, 100 reps of that. Which one relatively has more potential danger?
Right.
If you were going to look at the statistics, you would say the patrol officer doing traffic stops is, by proportion, more likely to end up in a hazardous, critical situation.
You're absolutely right, and the fewer citizens that jurisdiction serves, the more dangerous that job becomes, because it provides for less resourcing. The first agency I worked on, if I was on a traffic stop, it would be pretty rare to go longer than 45 seconds without a second unit showing up. The agency, yeah, exactly.
What a blessing.
The agency I just semi-retired from, still working as a reserve, but I mean, it was not unusual to make a traffic stop, and unless the traffic stop lasted 35 or 40 minutes, there wasn't anybody else showing up. And those guys get the same check the box training from the state as the guys who have cover is no more than 45 seconds away. They're giving them the same training. And the challenge with that is not only the safety of the officer, but the effectiveness of the service to the community, which can be degraded, and the trust in that law enforcement agency or cops in general is degraded through a lack of confidence in that individual officer. It's an individual thing. The more confidence that officer possesses based on his training and his experience, the less likely he is to make a boneheaded decision. The vast majority of things that go public, they burn across social media and everybody's pissed off at the cops, and all of a sudden we're the jerks. The vast majority of those bad decisions are based on a combination of lack of serious repetitive training, which leads to lack of confidence on the part of the officer, and he makes a rapid incorrect decision, which is almost always based on experiential and levels of training. So some of that is personal commitment on the part of the officer.
Absolutely.
But I mean, are we going to beat a dog for peeing on a fire hydrant? Like, we get what we get with the demographic in the modern era with law enforcement. So how about we work on, and I know I'm kind of preaching now, but we focus on what we can control, and what we can control is the level of training that our guys get as individual officers across the country. Like,
so much, and at so many levels of that, the things that I just feel so strongly about, for the civilian, for the people who don't understand those, the problem sets, if I've come to learn them and understand them, is certainly there's the individual, and it's like with everything, the individual dedication and drive to do the job, be prepared, and that's always, in higher level organizations, you weed people out by the presence or the lack of that personal discipline and dedication. It's not it's not possible to do across the board at all levels, and that's why some people, gravitate to elite organizations because they want to be in that kind of environment. Um, you know, then there's the policies that our officers have to subscribe to, not just the law, but sometimes individual agency policies, or there is a command influence that holds them back. What I was thinking of specifically is I'm gonna move it along and transition into something more concrete. Is when the Uvalde school shooting went down. Within a short period of time after that, Texas DPS issued a preliminary after action report from their investigation that I had access to. And it was somewhere within a day or two that a friend of mine who's legal and a law enforcement pundit who's often a talking head on the national shows called me and said, they want to talk to me about this Uvalde investigation. Tell me what you can do about it. And I said, let me give you a quick summary and let me talk about what the issues were, at all level. Was there a fault of, I'm not going to do a whole rundown on it, but at all these levels, was there a fault at the individual level? Absolutely. Individual officer training, initiative, ethos, just a complete lack of any understanding of the legal basis of what their duties were and their protections are in protecting the public as a whole and providing for public safety, right? The first officer on the scene saw the shooter approaching the school, clearly armed, evincing hostile intent just by the context of where they're at. Had a patrol rifle. I think it was don't quote me on this, but it was like about 125 meters from the shooter getting ready to carry out a school shooting, and the officer did not engage, called to hire to ask permission, asking what to do, right? These are things that are pretty well established. And then during this whole period of indecision, that all at one level goes down to individual training and understanding of responsibilities and duties, probably a lack of any confidence whatsoever in the ability to deal with that threat ballistically and stop it safely, right? That deputy or officer, I can't remember which, specifically stated to Texas DPS that they were concerned about, the school being within the line of fire. Which any amount of training would have, mitigated all of that. And then at the next levels, there was a command culture. There was there was a leadership issue. There were clearly policies going on in that agency that just would have prevented that active shooter incident from occurring. And then even when there was a response, there's just a complete lack of tactical and technical proficiency in even be able to treat it as an active shooter situation instead and say, well, this is a barricade suspect and we're going to hang back. And it's like, right, you don't understand even basic NTOA definitions, and not being able to, accurately apply definitions, which is, there's I hate to go off on this, but there's, in logic and intelligence, there's a priori, which is just to say things that are self-evident, that don't require analysis or logic. And then there's a posteriori knowledge, which, requires the application of reason. And everything that happened there failed both of those basic applications of logic. So, if while we're on this, if it's, appropriate, to try and make these clear for people, I try and go back to the John Chapman, elucidation of, what we try to do when we're looking at training and, and like what you came up with years ago, which is absolutely correct when we talk about this taxonomy or this hierarchy of our critical tasks. Because at the end of the day, that's really what we're talking about. We're trying to break down for anybody, answering that question about, how do I look for training? Who do I look for training? What training do we need? So in looking at those critical tasks, now I won't go through a big dive on this, but we talk about skills, techniques, procedures being a big step, to capabilities to mission. So when we're looking at critical tasks, and I could break it down like this, is like you're learning things like a skill, shooting a pistol, shooting a carbine, all of those weapon operator skills. We call them weapon operator skills because they're skills. They're fundamentals. By themselves, they don't do anything. They don't give you a capability. They don't give you an ability to do anything because you can shoot a B8 at 25 yards or whatever like that. It doesn't take you to level where then you can take that skill and go out and aid the public or really yourself in any way. Techniques become in that next level of hierarchy of learning these critical tasks. We assemble many skills together to build techniques. We assemble skills and techniques to get to this level where we can do something useful, what we would think of as procedures. We talk a lot about procedure-based training. CQB, close quarters battle, however you like to describe that, that's what we stick with and prefer. For most officers and military operators, is really their first level where they're learning a procedure. They're learning as a member of a 2-man team or a 5-man element or a full SWAT team how to reduce structures, how to fight in enclosed spaces, how to apply angles of attack against angles of exposure, these things like that. But to be able to be a member, be an assaulter on a SWAT team, how many skills and techniques do you need to have acquired to be able to get to the point where you can move to a breach point, identify whether it's a push or pull door? Do I need to mechanically breach this door? How do I address the door? How do me and my partner deal with it? So one of us has a weapon ready while one of us actions the door. How do we assess what's in the room for this side of the threshold? How do we enter the room? How do we clear corners, collapse sectors of fire, move to points of domination? How do we make space for the teammates behind us? How do I identify the next threat area? How do we move to it? How do we deal with suspects? Well, this takes many hundreds of hours of assembling skills and techniques to get to the point we can apply procedures. Just to carry this through, I said I wasn't going to do a deep dive on it,
This isn't a deep dive for the audience.
It's true. It's not a deep dive, but sticking with me, then capabilities is we assemble all of these different kind of procedures to say that then we now have a capability. We have a hostage rescue capability. We have a capability to deal with active shooters. We have a capability to, do high risk apprehension.
Right.
We have, these are trying to meet all of our identifiable SWAT missions and things like that. We're trying to build all of these until we can say, okay, as a agency, as a unit, if our mission is to provide, counterterrorism support to this community, how many of these building blocks do we have to have built on one another to say we can accomplish this mission? So, this is supposed. So we take the skills and the techniques and procedures and the capabilities, and we train these from the ground up. To be able to say, okay, we have people trained, credentialed, regularly qualified weapons operators. We have people who are practicing as individuals and as team, their door procedures or their door techniques and their mechanical, ballistic, and thermal breaching techniques and skills. And then we work together as a unit to be able to do CQB, to do room clearing, And as a capability, we work together and we've gotten all the skills and the techniques and the procedures to do this in no light situations.
Mm-hmm.
We learn how to use white lights and infrared illumination and night
Mm-hmm.
vision so that the CQB procedure, we can perform it at
Mm-hmm.
night, that we can say we have it as a capability and all these things. So to say that we want to have this mission, to say like we want to have a tactical capability as this organization, then we have to plan these things down. If this is we want to be able to do hostage rescue, we want to be able to respond to active shooters. If that's what we want to have that tactical mission, or this is just an example of breaking it down, we have to plan these things down. And for anybody who doesn't know, John Chapman is like the first person in the community who ever broke this down in a way that lets us organize and think about what we're doing. Because, and again, I'm trying to help answer this question for anybody at any level of like, what training does a law enforcement officer need at any level? And I'm not the arbiter of that. What I'm saying is, and what we've spent nearly a couple of decades is trying to help people understand is you don't need another weapon operator course, probably, right?
Probably.
You've like gone through your academy. You're a member of an agency, a full-time or reserve officer or deputy. You have to qualify, meaning you have to practice regularly. You have to do all of these things. By the time you've gotten really good instruction with your duty weapons, whatever they may be, and that you're maintaining proficiency on that, yeah, it's a very valuable thing. It's enjoyable. Any class you go to, if you learn even one new thing from an instructor, that class was worth going to.
Right.
But as you're budgeting training for yourself as an individual or for your officers, is like, you most likely don't. If you're issuing patrol rifles for the first time, you need to have somebody come in and teach a patrol rifle course, right? By the time everybody is doing all of these things, qualifying and all of that, you're not talking new officers. You don't need to bring a guy in to run another weapon operator course, right? You do not need your 10th weapon operator course, right? Those aren't the skills that you need to be, budgeting, your resource to do. We've spent, like I say, all of this time trying to help understand the difference between skills, techniques, and procedures. And there's so many procedures that are just foundational that need to be absorbed. And we feel very strongly about, of course, CQB being a common procedure to anybody, not just somebody who's on a tactical team.
Right. Every patrolman needs to know this.
Right. A patrolman needs to know all of that. It's very simply, it's like, the world is primarily, populated with structures, with people where, like I say, we won't take a deep dive on it, but where angles of exposure are compressed in time and space, moving through any enclosed environment, building, parking lot, car after car is nothing but areas where, you're denied visual access, where there could be somebody, especially an armed threat, concealing themselves behind, and having that basic understanding of how we see these things and how to develop an intuitive tactic for dealing with all of that is very foundational to the ability to provide safety and security for the public, much less for the individual officer.
Right.
So again, trying to answer that and say, here's the difference. It's like budgeting the time and the trouble to send an officer or have a trainer come to you to like go through another pistol or carbine course and have somebody teach you how to shoot around barricades is nigh on useless, in my opinion. It has its place, it's foundational, but that's not a substitute for procedural training, because those are skills. until you can assemble skills and techniques to be able to perform a procedure, you're nowhere near being able to say you have a capability and you can fulfill a mission.
Right, exactly. And we have seen that so much. Um, just in the years that we've been teaching, we get cops who come, especially cops. It applies to everyone, but we've had cops show up with 25 weapons operator course certificates, and they come to a CQB class or a patrol tactics class, and the first time they face opposition from a paper target, they all that stuff goes away because they're focusing on the wrong things and they're training to conscious competency, and that's a whole nother
Yeah, it's a
portion of
topic
the
for it's
discussion.
a
But
long topic for another show. But yes, it's very common that we see people, and I've seen that. It's like the second morning of a 4-day introductory CQB class. We're finally getting to the point where people have done things dry, and you've learned all this, and you practice it, and you're doing all these things where the shooter will enter a room and identify a threat target, and have been given the parameters for what is acceptable shot placement to have neutralized the threat and all of that from an amazing distance of like 5 yards, not be able to put shots into an 8-inch circle on a paper target. I'm a USPSA grandmaster. I can't believe I'm shooting this badly. It's like, well, the absolute rule is, you take somebody who's successful on the square range and you now put them in full personal protective equipment, and their IQ drops 25 points. Take that person and then put them into the shoot house, and that IQ is dropped below 70. Until there's familiarity and confidence and things like that, it's like the 25 shooting classes on the square range haven't done anything to advance their ability to apply that on demand in a realistic 3-dimensional environment. It just doesn't. And that's not a knock against anyone who's a member of any group. That is a human experience across the board.
Yep. And I've talked to a professional race car driver a couple years ago about this exact topic, and he encounters the same problem. Just because somebody cannot think about applying the turn signal as they're approaching a corner doesn't mean they can do a corner at speed, because they've practiced an individual skill in too much isolation without exposing themselves to context. And that's, as you know, John, and the public hopefully knows, with as much as I feel like I've been talking about it lately, but Foundation has 3 fundamental missions. One being these 2-week-long courses aimed at small department police officers. Those 2 courses are focused exclusively on just 5 skill sets. It takes an entire week, right? It's the constitutional judgment, marksmanship, breaching, medical, and tactics. And both courses are so focused on those 5 things because that's about and even at 5 days, that's a full sprint to get
It's
that stuff done.
ambitious. It's people drinking out of the fire hose.
Right.
Absolutely. Any one of those, even a basic, mechanical breaching course
is 5 days.
Oh yeah, 3 to 5 days just for the mechanical aspect on and on.
Right.
The other things that you're putting in there. Same with medical. Everybody learns at a different pace, and there's nothing wrong with that. But certainly it's, as things are designed, giving people the ability to understand, and I'll talk more about this, the principles, so that even if, in that period of time, even in a 40-hour course, even dealing with one general procedural subject like CQB, you're going to understand and walk away with the bare bones fundamentals. You will not have internalized anything. You will not have mastered anything. It takes closer to 200 hours of dedicated work to start to
Yep.
internalize those things, in my opinion.
Mhm.
But all real learning is self-learning. Uh,
Can you say that one more time, John?
all real learning is self-learning, which means is that you have to drive yourself to continue to study and practice. And a huge part of that doesn't necessitate travel to a specific environment in order
Mhm.
to like practice and train. Most of that is mental. And,
Mhm.
you know, here's kind of where I'll take an aside and try and put some meat on the bones of,
Mhm.
you know, why and how we do the things that we do. And I'll do it a little bit myself. You're so complimentary of me and thing. You know, one of the reasons that we hit it off almost immediately from our very first time working together
Mhm.
was, of course, a mutual respect. But
Mhm.
you know, as we quickly began to talk, I can remember it's like 18 years ago, thereabout. Is just identifying the same problems, identifying the same
Mhm.
inability to, like, you know, why is this better than this? Why
Mhm.
have we been taught this is the way to do something when we've seen that this is a problem,
Mhm.
uh, you know, but yet it's still taught this way, you know, and I learned a lot, of course, in special forces, the formal training process and the way you just learn to think about things and deal with
Mhm.
problems in extremis, in very
Mhm.
austere and dangerous environments, and then being fortunate, like I say, to have many years to put those things into application.
Mhm.
You know, I learned from really great, smart people. I, you
Mhm.
know, came to my own kind of enlightenment at different times just by the situations that you're thrown into. Um,
Mhm.
but a big part of my education in philosophy,
Mhm.
in how to break down and understand training, actually came through the martial arts.
Mhm.
And it came from, I not going anywhere with all of this other than by the purpose to say I was exposed to somebody for many years who was influential in my life. A guy named Carl Scott. When I
Mhm.
left the army, I'd left Special Forces. Was going through college. I was still in the Special Forces reserves, trying to make my
Mhm.
way through that whole painful process.
Mhm.
By being in the training world in martial arts, I stumbled into uh, a school where the guy who ran that school, this guy Carl Scott, taught traditional Japanese and Chinese martial arts.
Mhm.
And he was the guy who succeeded and learned systems from around the world, was very well recognized, well respected. We became great friends as I became a student and one of his
Mhm.
instructors, and we spent a lot of time together. As much or more than the actual arts that I learned and the
Mhm.
things that I practiced was what I learned from him about how to learn, how to analyze things, and how to teach.
Mhm.
And a guy who could do Tai Chi, very soft forms of martial arts, hard forms of martial arts like Kung Fu,
Mhm.
Okinawan karate, soft forms of Japanese arts like Aikido, Jujutsu, was great at judo. I mean, everything the guy did, he was just great on. He said, don't look for the dissimilarities in things.
Mhm.
Look for the similarities, because at some level there are natural similarities and
Mhm.
they're defined by principles. Now,
Yep.
it's not till years later where I studied and identified these things to say, like, well, of course, stealing. And if I go off on a tangent here and some of this is missing anybody, I apologize, but I'm giving it to you in totality
Mhm.
and you can just
Right.
accept it what it is. But I took this from the objectivists. You know,
Mhm.
principles are basic truths upon which other truths are based.
Mhm.
Being able to look at any way of doing something, any technique or procedure or skill or organization, and to be able to say, what are the principles behind how they're doing what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Another way of looking at those basic principles is you could say fundamentals, right? I'll use the context of like, learning how to run a pistol, right? The
Right.
fundamentals of marksmanship with a pistol. You can say there's stance control, there's grip control, there's sight control, there's breath control, there's trigger control, there's follow through and calling the shot. Those are the fundamentals, the principles of marksmanship.
Mm-hmm.
And when you learn those principles and you learn those fundamentals from an instructor to a student, it does a couple of things. Number one, it gives this paradigm by which the instructor can help you, can coach you and say, the problem you're having is this. Here is where you are violating a principle that is causing you to not get the success downrange that you wish that you had.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, whatever that violation is, your trigger control, you're doing whatever, it's all of that. But right, why is this guy as an instructor, we all do the same thing. Why is this person, I've shown them, they're looks like they're, but why are they not getting success?
Mm-hmm.
I'm identifying the principle, where the root problem is, at what level that lies, and the deficiency in their principle or principles where they're not getting success.
Mm-hmm.
As the student, if I learn and I'm taught these principles and I have them in some kind of written note form or whatever, where I can go back and I can self-assess,
mm-hmm.
I can then, as I'm learning that process, I can go to the range and say like, okay, how come I'm not getting the success that I want? Let me think about these. How's my stance? Okay. How's my grip? Okay. Grip. Let's check out. Let me do what I was taught. It's my trigger control. It's whatever it is. But if you don't have an understanding of principles, how do you know why you're succeeding? How do you know how to help yourself when you're not succeeding and getting the outcome that you want? So it's like principles are these foundational truths upon which all of these other truths are based. And when you understand, and this is what Carl Scott taught me about, learning judo and learning kung fu. Where are the principles the same? Look, you're trying to throw somebody. It's you're trying to do like a hip throw or any kind of hand technique, right? If you can't get your center lower than the center of the person you're trying to throw, doesn't matter how much upper body strength you have, it's never going to work. Right. You have to move and you have to make their body and your bodies joined. You have to have your center lower than yours. You have to follow through and complete the throw. You have to do all those things. And if you're not getting that success, but you don't know why, just telling somebody to go faster or go harder or use more strength is rarely ever successful. It's the same thing in CQB, right? Going faster, shooting faster, yelling more, whatever it is, that is never an answer that is going to bring you success.
Yep.
So part of what happened to me early during this period of time in my mid and late 20s is I was learning through studying something completely different, through studying traditional martial arts, how to identify the underlying physical, biomechanical thought principles that though something ostensibly it looks different, judo looks different than kung fu. Tai Chi looks different than Okinawan karate. But at some level, the biomechanical principles, all these other principles, when you can identify the principles, you can learn how to succeed, or you can learn different power sources and why they're correct. It's learning how to apply them. So the same thing now gets into when we were talking about, right? Self-learning is the best learning. How do we design programs of instruction? How do we analyze how something is done so that the information can be passed on and imparted correctly, unless we do it by identifying the underlying fundamental truth that makes something either valid or invalid.
Yep.
Not only for the purposes of ensuring that what we're doing is done the best, most efficient, and valid way, but because then the information could be consistently, correctly transmitted, and the information can be retained, and self-learning and self-teaching can continue as long as there is that understanding of the principles behind whatever it is that you're teaching. And any form of teaching, learning, any mind-body skill, which is primarily what we're talking about, everything with weapons, with breaching, with suspect control, with vehicle stops, anything like over there, there are principles behind the skills and the techniques to procedures to doing all of those things. And if they're not identified, if they're not taught, everything results now. And this is what we identified way back in how come we've been taught this, we've all seen where it fails, we've modified it in some way, but at the end of the day, it all gets back down to dogmatic learning, an irrefutable belief that the way I am doing something is right because that's what I was taught. And the guys who taught me that were, they came from CAG. They must be right. This guy was a SWAT team leader for 20 years and taught at NTOA, and it's right because that's who I learned it from. And he knows
the dangers of credentialing.
Right. So it's again that thing we talk about, credentialing and provenance, but is the information still is it correct in and of itself? Is it
both things have to be present?
Right. And all of these things happen. So we have always believed in principle-based teaching. Like we've seen that's one of those things that drew us together. We saw eye to eye of the truth of that, from day one, the first time we started to talk about all of these problems. So part of this, I'd say, is when we're looking at all that, it's like saying, I don't want to give anybody more than they want to know, but you have to understand, it's helpful to understand how this fits into the core of the mission of what we've always tried to accomplish with training for both the military and law enforcement, and especially what we're trying to do with Task Force 70. And a great part of that lies in this big, intellectual journey through philosophy. How do you know? It's always answering this question. How do I know if the guy who's training me, is it correct just because my state law enforcement credentialing academy has put out this training package, and because we're following that, we know it's correct and it's right, and we're checking the box and we're doing all of that, which that's just an example. Most of the time it is extremely validated, and that's why it's part of a curriculum. But there are many examples where just because something is part of a curriculum, where it came from or how that was determined is not necessarily validated. So how do you know? So I'll talk about this, and hopefully it'll be entertaining, and maybe somebody will walk away with something. At the highest level of where we're going to go with this, at the top of this hierarchy, this taxonomy, lies a branch of philosophy that we would call epistemology. And big fancy word that just means nothing other than, the study of how does a person determine what's the difference between opinion and a validated belief.
Right.
Is the sun is yellow is viewed from Earth? Is that opinion or is that a validated belief? Right. And it goes in many, many directions from there. A lot of things that like intellectuals do is like they study things that seems pretty obvious to everybody else. I certainly used to feel that way about philosophy and mocked friends of mine who are in graduate programs for philosophy. And then later in life said, oh God, I wish I had the education that they did, because I've had to go back and learn all of this on my own. It's been quite painful. So at that level, epistemology, how do we know the difference between a validated opinion, or a validated belief, and something that's just somebody's opinion? I hate to go there, but a man can be a woman, There are no genders. There's something like that. Okay,
Right.
there's no, somebody's epistemology is way off on all of that. Men cannot have babies. Sorry. So I don't think anybody in this audience will disagree with me, but that's an example where someone's epistemology is just, it's not even present.
Right.
That's because they're cultural Marxists, and it's purposeful that they're deceiving themselves and trying to make you believe in their deception so they can get you to do something that they want you to do.
Believe my delusion.
Absolutely. The step below epistemology, or one trail, goes into what we call heuristics. Heuristics becomes interesting because essentially it's another big fancy word that is a study of how do we acquire our knowledge and how do we learn. For us, where that devolves down to is what we call a branch of heuristics, from epistemology to heuristics to this branch of heuristics that we call intuition. Intuition as a study is just simply, how do we make decisions rapidly based on a limited number of facts? And people have heard of like analysis by paralysis, and some of that is just an innate part of people's personality, right?
Right.
It's somehow it's a trait where I've been to this restaurant 100 times. I always order the same thing, but I'm going to look at every item on the menu, and the waiter's going to come back 4 times because I feel it is necessary and it is correct somehow for me to read every item on the menu to make sure I make the correct choice, and that I can't criticize myself for making a bad choice by ordering the same thing, and no one else can criticize me. Right? That's a whole psycho profile, but that's an example of like analysis by paralysis, or it's like, I don't want to make a decision without taking everything into account. And that means there's a very long scale of time going on while this mental process is going on. As armed professionals, those processes are detrimental. Absolutely. Right? And if that's part of your personality, we have to teach you that that's part of your personality, and when it's okay to apply that and when it's not.
Right.
Intuition, learning how to make a rapid decision based on a limited number of facts, is what we're dealing with, right? So at all levels of training, it's like I say, once we get beyond the skills and techniques and we're getting to what we're primarily concerned with at some level, like in the basic 5-day officer package, is trying to build this body of intuition, these heuristics by which anyone seeing this limited number of inputs can trigger them to take an intuitive and correct action to affect the superior outcome, right? For example, John Chapman, if the world doesn't know it, John Chapman is the person who codified for close quarters battle, for CQB, the ability to not see the world as, this is a intersection in a hallway. This is a room full of a bunch of desks and partitions. This is, a room with many different kinds of furniture in it. And, I have to look behind every piece of furniture, and I have to do all of this, and that's how I'm going to clear something. John Chapman was the first person in the world to look at this and say, we're going to break this down into basic shapes, because we're going to categorize everything into an angle of exposure to which we're going to apply an angle of attack. Most angle of exposures involve like some kind of 90-degree shape in the environment. And then when we look at environments and we break it down and say, well, here are angles, these angles of exposure that are presenting in an environment that now invariably inside structures and in the outside world form one of 4 very basic shapes. It's an L, it's a T, it's a 4-way. It's just another variation on that we call the top of the T. And that when we now teach people to say, don't think of rooms and hallways and doors and stuff like that is all of these different, completely separate, scatological, confusing, chaotic items that we have to deal with. So, what is this? There's an angle of exposure on the left. There's an angle of exposure on the right. That forms a T. Two threats opposed to each other 180 degrees. That means that there could be a threat on the left, a threat on the right. We have two people. We have learned a tactic for how to deal with that, to apply an angle of attack, ourselves and our weapons to deal with a ballistic threat into that, how to do it in the optimized manner to increase our ability to win the fight and survivability and things like all of that. But this is this whole why I'm going in through this, as you understand, and this is all distilled down from the beginning of our association together and looking at how we learn, how we train as assaulters, how we then develop tactics, techniques, and procedures to train other people, through which we validate all of these things to say, what is our basis then for our epistemology, for saying this is superior because it's our opinion it's superior, or because it's a validated belief? Right. We've always fought, and the community has fought the whole way from everything being very dogmatic. This I have an unshakable belief that this is the absolute right way to do it. You're going to talk to Chris Sizlove in the not too distant future. And, some years ago, Chris told me a great story that is very explicit, the best I've ever heard, that explained the whole dogma phenomenon. He's teaching a basic CQB course and getting this, tactical team in a southern region of the United States through how we teach door procedures and room processing procedures and seeing things based on shapes and how to work together as teams and how our whole system builds. And the SWAT team leader gets to the end of all this and he says, I just don't see why this is better than the way we already do things. And Chris just basically said, well, let's talk about this. Say, how many call outs have you gone on in the last, say, 3 years? How many hits? And the SWAT team leader said, call it about 100. It's like, okay, pretty average number, number, and all of that. Out of those 100 call outs, those 100 hits, how many of them were actually opposed? How many of them were actually opposed by a motivated threat who, made you have to use deadly physical force? The guy said 3 of them. Said, how many of those operations did you get guys hurt on? And he said 3 of them. He said, so you're telling me that your system, your TTPs for CQB, they work 97% of the time, except when they work none of the time. It's like they work every time nobody is opposed and you're completely satisfied with them. 3 times you were opposed, you got 3 officers seriously injured, and you're insisting that the way you're doing things right now, which you could very clearly see was just rife with, unfortunately, errors in just basic understanding of CQB principles. And it had a big effect on that guy, So why I'm explaining all of this and why I hope it's communicative to, people from our background, from people who are just interested in Task Force 70 and why we're doing what we're doing, from a body of systems that we've developed, not just in the systems themselves, but the principle-based criteria by which we judge the system and how we validated it, and things like that. There's quite a bit that has gone into, and it's not simply, let's train guys how to shoot pistols better. Let's get that split time faster. Let's get that draw faster. Let's help you transition from the iron sights to the red dot and, and stuff like that. Not that any of those things are unimportant. They are. Their skills, though, they're
Hmm.
just foundational level skills,
Hmm.
and their importance is great, but by themselves,
Hmm.
mastery of skills. You're going to college to go to college for your whole life, is
Right.
Chappie would say. You're just going to college to go to college.
Yep.
You know,
Well, and it's one of the big challenges of having been involved on several committees in different states for their post programs. Basic police academy in some states it's 24 weeks, in other states it's 12 weeks. Whichever it is, the longer the academy is really doesn't matter. An entire police academy is truly built around individualized skills for officers because it has to be able to they have to have that fundamental information, and physical ability. It's kind of the point of the police academy. Then the field training program's purpose is to build techniques. However, some field training programs work great and some don't. So the smaller the department, the bigger the challenge in continuing that process that's already been started. It's also a challenge for these small agencies that our mission is to serve to even be able to identify what they don't, what they what they lack, what they need to be able to focus on. So one of the subtle purposes of the courses is to go back to their department and not tell them how messed up they are. It's quite the opposite. It's, hey,
that's right.
I've learned how to um, I am learning how to identify these things and develop them personally. How can we incorporate some of this? So by every cop we teach, some percentage are going to be slugs, but most of them won't be if they're motivated enough to ask to come to a foundation course. Um, we can spread much more efficiently doing it this way than we can if we fly around the country like we've done for 25 years and try to catch individuals kind of on accident, like they happen to show up and we can educate them. So, and that's why it's part of the reason this is a foundation and not a company. And it's also part of the reason that we not only need public support, but we want it. We want to diversify that base as wide as possible because that allows us to diversify the student base as far as possible and spread these concepts that have been somewhat lost in education as a whole um, in the country. And John, you may see things differently, being through much more educational processes than I have, but it seems to be even higher education in some places is turned into kind of a check the box program as well,
There,
somewhat.
there's no question about that, and
Hmm.
thank God. I mean, the the post programs,
Hmm.
the NTOA programs,
Hmm.
stuff like that I see. Thank God they're out there. Thank
Hmm.
God they have the input that they do and the validation
Hmm.
that they do. Uh, you know, I,
Yep.
you know, uh, all law enforcement is local,
Hmm.
and even, on a state by state basis, as you break a state down, there's
Oh yeah.
vastly different needs. There's such
Hmm.
vastly different
Hmm.
environments, community that not even as, a doctrinalized state program
Hmm.
meet every agency
Right.
needs, perfectly or appropriately. And there
Hmm.
still has to be, at some level, that ability for somebody to say, here's what we're lacking. Here's where we would like to improve. Here's what we would like to sustain. Here is what they're putting out. Sounds good in the ideal world. I get they're checking boxes because they
Hmm.
have to, but it just has no application to our agency and our needs and our
Hmm.
community, and that's just an inherent understanding that has to be there with education.
Hmm.
You know,
Yep.
uh,
Absolutely.
the thing it's like I say, there's so many exciting things about TF70 and what it offers. I know you've talked about this before, but uh, as a society,
Hmm.
we don't teach the Constitution. The
Right.
public education system has eliminated it. And if you're
Hmm.
a guy like me, you understand, I'm a product of the public school system of the
Hmm.
1970s. you know uh During that period of my life, I went to secondary school and high school in Michigan, in a suburb of Ann Arbor. And
Hmm.
every teacher was a product of the University of Michigan school system, and they were all, uh, rules for radicals, Abby
Hmm.
Hoffman, Noam Chomsky disciples, and things like that.
Hmm.
And, you know, uh, uh, social studies evaporated during that period
Hmm.
of time. What happened later on through the public school system, all the way up through the public university system,
Hmm.
was even worse. It's often
Right.
been said in the military, um, that we're the only military in the world that doesn't indoctrinate recruits into a patriotic belief, um, in the rightness of their cause based on their history, and how
Hmm.
their government is formed. That in the U.S. Army, experientially, that's it's implicit. But the background, recruits have never been trained in the Constitution,
Hmm.
because the military would do it very badly. First of all,
Hmm.
secondly, they've always believed that the society is doing it, that the
Hmm.
culture is doing it, that they're receiving 18, 19-year-old recruits who already know all of that they've received it somehow through civics. And that
Hmm.
got entirely
Hmm.
strangled out of the education
Hmm.
system beginning in the late
Yep.
1960s. It was very purposely removed.
Hmm.
The same thing in, I've talked for years uh, to law enforcement guys, and
Hmm.
everybody, every academy graduate, talk about their understanding of the constitutional basis of laws, and the powers, the authority, the responsibilities that they have as a law enforcement officer. And nobody is aware that there's a constitutional basis to any of those
Hmm.
things. It's
Right.
it's incredible. So, things that Task Force 70 is doing that is absolutely as important as the skills, techniques, and
Hmm.
procedures to make the communities and safer, and officers' survival better, is understanding the constitutional basis for
Hmm.
American law enforcement, and what
Right.
your duties and obligations and responsibilities
Hmm.
and protections are.
Right.
Um, because that's absent from society as a whole.
Hmm. It is. And one of the goals in a perfect world, an officer who leaves one of our programs or graduates both courses would be able to educate a member of the public in their small community on what they actually do constitutionally, which this is a giant rabbit hole that we will avoid. You kind of touched on it, but that law enforcement education is almost completely uh, centered around case law, which is um, a centralized state form of education, in that we can change what the law means based on case law, is the fundamental precept of it. And it's sold, or it was sold in the 70s to law enforcement executives as, we need to educate these cops on what they're allowed to do. That's how case law is viewed on the street level. When its actual purpose is, it's just an expression of precedence, which is always changeable. So it is critically important that officers know case law, but it is important um, in the framework of what our responsibilities as police officers is. It's not important into what as to how it's sold, which is what we're allowed to do. Cops aren't allowed to do anything. Like, we have responsibilities to the Constitution. We're not allowed to throw our weight around and encourage the worst in human nature amongst ourselves. So I'm I'm glad that you spoke about that because it's critically important to us. And
it very much is. There needs to be a resurgence in
mm-hmm,
understanding of why we are a unique,
mm-hmm,
in nation, that we're a nation
mm-hmm,
of laws. There's been a purposeful erosion in
mm-hmm,
trust of the law and law
mm-hmm,
enforcement in general,
yep,
which we need to combat very definitely. And I mean,
mm-hmm,
just look at things that are happening around us daily in the news.
mm-hmm,
It's like we have judicial opinions from lower courts that are
mm-hmm,
in conflict with the Supreme Court, that have upheld the Constitution, that are constantly being used as a rationale for
mm-hmm,
validating
mm-hmm,
things that are very, very much supported by the Constitution. So
right,
it's like everything. If the average person doesn't know what the law is, if they don't know what their
mm-hmm,
rights are, it's very easy to violate them.
mm-hmm, yep,
And
yeah,
and of course, and the same thing goes with a misunderstanding about what somebody's responsibilities are under the law.
mm-hmm,
Not just their rights. There's duties
mm-hmm,
and responsibilities that go hand in hand with
right,
rights in our country. Our
right,
our the wonderful the liberty that we have in this country is freedom, individual freedom, but it's restricted by the rights of others.
mm-hmm,
And
yep,
there's just been a complete erosion of that
mm-hmm,
at all levels, uh, of higher education, both in the
mm-hmm,
military and in law enforcement.
mm-hmm,
And like I say, as much as anything,
mm-hmm,
of all of yes, it's more fun to go like bust doors open with a
mm-hmm,
Halligan in a sledge.
sure,
It's much more fun to practice CQB with the partner, and learn to put tourniquets on and stop the
mm-hmm,
bleeding and stuff like that. But I'm glad that it makes me proud that it is a co-equal part of the curriculum, that our
mm-hmm,
continued understanding and dedication
mm-hmm.
to the Constitution is an inherent part of all that training. So
It absolutely is, and it's thanks in part, at least, to Dr. Regan and Hillsdale College. For the audience, Dr. Regan's going to be on the show here in a few weeks.
oh, fantastic.
And we're going to take the deep dive of deep dives into the how the Constitution applies in the law enforcement world, and how to better understand it and study it yourself, because the study of the Constitution isn't something that is just taught once. It needs
That's
to be
right.
a constantly inserted into everything, because it's what drives what we do. So, anyhow, uh, John, you coming on the show has been so appreciated. More than you know, despite referring to me in the third person. I know that's one of your favorite things. Um, it's much appreciated. And
Always.
brother, as usual, all the work that you put into this community and the military community can't be appreciated enough by the American people. You're a great American. We appreciate you very much.
I'm a truly a fortunate guy. I get more than I give, is how I feel, and it's always
I
great.
feel the same way.
It's always great to be able to contribute, and there's no greater feeling in the world than helping guys out who
Hmm.
are eager to get training, and I could not be more excited about getting Task Force 70 launched, and get
Hmm.
to be a part of that is another wonderful part of my life. So thank you again.
Well, thank you. Um, Guys, we appreciate y'all for watching. Please share the show. That's not a driving monetization request. That's we need this information out. We need information about the foundation. Guys, the foundation doesn't work unless you guys help us out. So we ask you for $20 a month. we give out some pretty great prizes for that. So chosen at random from amongst the monthly donors. So check us out at tf70.org/donate. Or if you just want to learn more about us, just go to tf70.org. So guys, for Doc and for myself, we thank you guys for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next time.